feels kind of interesting to be here, like as a designer. I think for Stack, it feels like maybe more predominantly a developer conference, but I'm here today as a designer, and I want to talk to you about design today. So maybe you're not a designer, and you think, well, why should I care about design? Why is this relevant to me today? I'm going to go into why this is essential, whether or not you are a designer. Because whether you're a designer or not, I think all of us here today, if we're here and we're creating digital products, what we actually want to do is we want to create successful, effective products. And if you look back into the history of this industry of the digital economy and software design and development, you can see that there's a pattern of this kind of like symbiotic relationship between design and technology, going back into things like Xerox PARC and the original Macintosh, creating the original GUI that kind of like set the kind of standard for a lot of things we do today. That was a combination of technology and design, right? And then we move forward and we think about like the iPhone, right? The iPhone created an entire ecosystem, economies around it. Again, that was the combination of technology and design together, creating more effective products. Things like Airbnb disrupting the hospitality industry was design and technology. And even here in Singapore, we have organizations like DBS, who's transformed from a traditional bank to digitally native first organization creating amazing products. That success, I think, is a combination of both technology and design. So whether you're a designer or a developer or some other role, whatever you're going to create, I think it's essential to understand that both technology and design need to go together to create great products. So I'm here to talk to you today about how that works and where that's going today, what design is, and why you should be using design, whether you're a designer or not. But first, I want to give you some context. So right now, I think we're in a really exciting area, and the current landscape today, businesses are growing faster than ever. So we've got a bunch of numbers here I might want to go through, but first off, 80% here. If you look at indexes like the S&P 500 and Nikkei 2025, we've seen in the past 5 years that these have grown to record highs, over 80%, and they're now at peaks we've never seen before. And this is just a small sample. If you look at other indexes across Europe and Asia, we've seen similar results, and we're all hitting record growth. And at the same time, we look at things like another metric like, for example, the number of unicorn companies with billion-dollar valuations. And that has grown exponentially in the last few years. From 2018 to currently, that's grown from 236%. And many of those are actually increasingly from Asia. And then last, we have 17%, which is the projected scale of growth for the digital economy. What's at 17% by 2028, the digital economy should make up about 17% of global GDP. And this number itself is just an average across many different countries. And within different markets that are more mature, it could be even higher. So this is the current context of where we are today. And a lot of this is actually due to technology. So going here, sorry about that. So going into technology. So technology has actually empowered a lot of the things we take for granted today when we're creating great products. So a lot of these innovations, a lot of this growth that we've seen in past years has all been due to technology. Technology has been both like the enabler, the empowerer, and the disruptor of many things in business today. So if you think about how technology has enabled us to create more effective, more global, successful products today, it's due to a lot of different things. Technology has, in many ways, reduced the barriers to entry for many of the things that were much more difficult from the very beginning. If we look at the commoditization of technology, it used to be that technology was itself just a competitive advantage, where large corporations would create proprietary technology that would give them advantages in the market, and that would help them grow and scale. But we've seen now that technology itself has become commoditized, which we'll go into in a little bit today, and more smaller startups are able to leverage technology to create amazing innovations. And at the same time, the competition is global by default due to technology. So it used to be that you were maybe a local startup, a local business in your own market. But now, due to technology, anyone can ship a product around anywhere around the world. So what that means is whether you have ambitions for global or local, your competitors are always going to be global by default. And at the same time, not just the competitors for business, the talent, the competition for talent is also global by default. The technology has allowed us to hire remote workers and hire the best people around the world from anywhere, any location. So that gives startups the access to talent that they never had before. And then lastly, we have information. The spread of information itself has increased rapidly over the past few decades. And with that, the spread of business innovation has kept the pace. For example, when we have innovations that start in one market, that information is quickly spread across the world globally, and we see similar businesses popping up across other markets, right? So what does this mean for us today? Well, this means that as a business, even though it's incredibly easy to create incredibly successful global products today, it's actually harder than ever to stay competitive. This is due to the locality being global by default, the information sharing, the technology barriers being reduced, and the talent pool being much, much bigger. So I'm going to go into, on the technology side, some ways that technology has been commodified and how that changes the way we do business today. So first, I want to talk about cloud infrastructure. So if we look back a few decades and we think about software and internet services, it used to be the companies like Google and Amazon and Microsoft. They were the ones who had the resources to create, this global infrastructure to ship products around the world and scale it to millions of people or billions of people. And now this is, much, much different. These same providers, the same companies that use this as a competitive advantage actually realized that selling these services was more beneficial to them. And what this did was this commodified that competitive advantage in technology that they had. So it used to be that you had to build out your own infrastructure to have a global business. And now anyone can sign up for any of these services and they can launch their startup around the world and they can scale it very, very quickly. I mean, if you're in this room and you're creating a digital product or service, it's highly likely you probably use one of these three cloud providers. And along with that, we can talk about like digital commerce. So initially, if you're a local startup, integrating with the local payment system was maybe not too much of a challenge, but integrating with many payment systems around the world was a huge barrier for people wanting to scale their business globally. And not many startups could do that. But we got to a point where that itself as well has been commoditized. It used to be that larger companies were the only ones who could actually scale their digital payments across many different markets and locales. And now we have products like Stripe that allow any startup to integrate payments for countries all around the world and scale very, very quickly. And then finally, we get to today where we are with AI. So if you go back and think about AI, it used to be that something that larger companies would invest millions of dollars in decades of research. Companies like IBM spent millions of dollars in a decade creating something like Watson. And then their big bet was to create that as their unique competitive advantage. And now we have things like ChatGPT, we have Midjourney, and these are things that anyone can integrate in their app or service. They can just sign up for the service, integrate the API, and now you have an AI-powered product. So what this means is that technology itself, technology alone is no longer the differentiator. We go through this cycle of this invention and commodification, right, where this new technology is invented and someone holds that and someone uses it as a competitive advantage, and eventually someone else decides that, well, we're going to share that and we're going to let everyone use that. And in some way or other, it becomes commoditized. And once that's commoditized, the field is normalized. Everyone becomes the same again. There is no advantages anymore. And everyone can use this the same. So this cycle of invention to commodification is actually getting shorter and shorter as time progresses. So as someone who's working in building digital product and service, you have to think, if you're using technology and leveraging just technology as a competitive advantage, there's a high risk that very soon that technology, that technological advantage could be commoditized. So you have to think about how do we differentiate? And along with that, the competition is now global by default. So if previously you wanted to just be the first mover in a market, and you wanted to own a market, and once you've owned that market, continue to just thrive on your laurels of what you've done before, you could do that. You can own that market. But now, when you're trying to succeed in a market, you have to think that, like, is my business the best in the market, or is my business the best globally? Because if your business is not the best globally, even if you're only competing in a local market, it's highly probable that a global competitor will come to your market and they will be the better competitor because they'll have a higher bar for quality. So with all these things together, this becomes a little bit of a kind of a situation where we're starting into this area of uncertainty where technology is empowering startups to create amazing innovations, but the bar is much, much higher, and it's much easier to be disrupted. So how do we navigate this uncertainty? Well, one of the ways I think we can navigate this uncertainty is by breaking down some of these silos of what we traditionally use to create products and services. I think traditionally we think about design, engineering, marketing, sales, customer support, all these things as separate silos and separate disciplines, as like a specific role. Designers do design, engineers do development, marketers do marketing, etc. But in the next phase, we have to think about how we diversify, how we mix and match these skills. So if we go back to the technology aspect, if everyone's using the same technology, if everyone uses it in the same way, then everyone's going to get the same result, and you have no more differentiation, right? So if you're using the same technology, you need to use it in different ways. And the way we do that is we need to diversify the way we think, and diversify the skills that we have in roles. So we're here today in Singapore, and I feel like Singapore is actually just a great example of that diversity. There's so many different cultures, so many people of different backgrounds here today. And one of the things I love about Singapore is actually the food. So in Singapore, there's all these different types of food, and it's amazing. But one of the great things about food in Singapore is actually that sometimes you have these fusions of these different cuisines. So you have this traditional cuisine, but some places combine both of them, and sometimes those provide a new flavor, a new value, something that maybe is even better than original. And I think that's what we need to think about when we build products and services. We need to think about how do we combine these different disciplines and skill sets in a way that creates new value. Just for example, myself, I speak both English and I speak Japanese. I'm a designer, but I also write code, but I'm also doing strategy. And I combine all these things together to think in different ways and create in different ways and use that to differentiate the products and the services that I work on. And I think this is the future of how we start to break down these silos and collaborate between different disciplines. I think the future is democratizing these skills, taking the designers and engineers and marketers and breaking away from these. So it's not that these people will no longer exist. I think there's definitely a need for designers, engineers, and other specialists to continue to exist. But I think going forward, we'll see this kind of collaboration or this mixture of skills. We'll have one dominant skill, but then we'll mix in other skills as subsets to give us new areas of thought, new ways to create value. So one of those skills I want to talk about today is design. So the first thing I need to address is what is design? I think we think about design, maybe from someone who's not a designer, as something that's very creative. And if you think about creative, it's very abstract. It's kind of hard to, say, define, and it's hard to repeat and scale, right? But design itself is actually very logical. It's very structured in many different ways. If you look at things like design methodologies, things like the double diamond method, right? This is something that's used, commonly in design. But if you think about its relation to other different disciplines, it's just similar in many ways to things like science, right? So the double diamond is essentially the scientific method in just a different form, right? And if we think about that, we think about design, it's no longer something that's just abstract and creative. It's something that's very, very well defined and structured and repeatable, right? When you think about science, it's all about structure and repeatability to getting to a result. And design is very much very similar to that in many aspects. Another example of that would be atomic design. So atomic design is often used in design systems, right? So many of the software that we create is powered by design systems, and we take this modular approach, starting from very, very simple things. In atomic design, it starts with these elements called atoms, and those are combined together for more complex things like molecules to organisms and just extended, right? So this kind of modular, extensible, scalable approach is very logical. It's very structured, and it parallels, say, science and biology and other things that we look at as very logical process. So design itself is not something that's, say, abstract and it requires a specific talent. I think it's something that we can learn and something we can share and it's something we can apply to different circumstances. You don't need to be a designer to do design. You can just follow the practices to create design, right? So what I'm getting at is that I think we have this association right now of skills and roles being the same thing, that designers create design, engineers write code, and other different disciplines have this close, attachment to things. But I think we need to reevaluate how we think about these skills and roles. We need to decouple skills from roles. Roles can still exist, but we need to democratize the skills so that these skills can be used in other ways. It's kind of like if you think about math or science, like I'm sure everyone has probably used math or science somewhere in their work. These are incredibly powerful tools. And we don't think that, well, you're not a mathematician, you're not a scientist, you can't use math or science. Of course not. Everyone will use those things. Everyone learns those things. These are a core to our logic and how we think about things, right? So why do we think about things like design as something that has to be attached to a role? Why don't we think of that as an essential skill, as a way of thinking, as a way of problem solving? I think this is where we're going forward next with how we can make more effective products by creating specialists that are, a hybrid approach where we democratize these skills and, pull out design away from designers and have other roles like engineers using design and sales using design and other aspects. So I want to talk about one example of that today. So we're here and we're talking about like technology and digital products, but I'm going to talk about physical products today. So I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Muji, but Muji is a global retailer from Japan, and they sell really highly designed, very functional products. If you look at the name itself and you read the characters, it literally means just basically non-branded great products. So that's their ethos. It's great. If you're basically creating great products with great design. And something that stands out to me for Muji is not just their product design, but their store's display design, which is very, very interesting. If you ever gone to a Muji store, they have these really unique displays and everything is very beautifully aligned and it's very structured. But it's very interesting because at Muji they had a lot of different challenges around that. So despite having this great design in their stores, Muji doesn't have a display designer that just goes around and designs every single store. But if you go to London, if you go to Tokyo, if you're in Singapore, if you're anywhere where they have a Muji store, you'll see they have great design, right? So they had this challenge of how do we deliver consistent design globally with all these stores, and they have different stores at different amounts of stock and layouts. And this was a significant challenge because if you go back to thinking about design, you think of design as something that's creative and only designers can do. Well, that's not really scalable for a business like that. So what Muji did was they simply just made everyone a designer, right? Which just sounds easy, but there's a way that you can do it. So Muji took the thought process of design systems and applied that to their store display design. So they thought about all these different stores and they created, say, guidelines on how these things should be designed. Of course, they have a core design team, but they couldn't scale that across everyone and every store worldwide. So they had that core team create guidelines, and then they created, say, components. These are layouts, or these are different settings that you can do to create well-designed displays. So these are essentially components, the same you would use in design system today in software. And these are modular. You can mix and match these things. As long as you're going along with the guidelines, you'll be creating effective design. So they laid this out into a process, and they add patterns. And they also made it extensible because new products come up every day, and seasons change and things change. So they need to be able to scale with that as well. So what they were essentially able to do is they were able to take the skill of design, something that's, say, maybe very specific to a designer, of just designing a single display, and they were able to have non-designers be able to create just as effective design. Of course, someone who's professionally trained in that area maybe would have the most effective design, but someone with the right tools and the right guidance could create something very close and very effective. And the thing they created was this thing called Mujigram. So Mujigram is essentially a centrally managed operations manual, which doesn't sound very unique, and we think about franchises and global operations. But the fact that they were able to take something that was abstract like design and make it into something that's scalable and repeatable, I think was unique in that aspect. And they essentially democratized design and allowed everyone to use that, and in a way that provided unique value to the business. And in this guide itself is, it's scalable, it's reusable. It's essentially a design system. This design system can be updated at any time. People can send a pull request and say, hey, I have this new idea, we have this new process, let's put this in here. And that's how they've made everyone a designer. So as a result of this, they're able to kind of raise the quality of design. They're no longer dependent only on designers to create design. They're depending on everyone to create great design. And they're able to break down the silo of these skills, of designers being the only ones able to design and owning design, to everyone having the ability to make design. So what this does is this decouples the skill from the role. And I think this is where we're going forward when we think about these specialist roles of designers and developers and other things like that. So we have designers who do design, but what if we had marketers who do design, sales who does design, customer support, etc.? There are many different possibilities, and I think we need to explore these things to create more effective products. I mean, a great example of that would be like Salesforce, right? You think about design for product design, but Salesforce used design for sales, right? And they took design thinking and they were and used that to create a framework for them to engage with their customers more effectively. And as a result of that, they improved their sales process, right? They are able to use design thinking to become closer to the customer and do better discovery. And as a result of that, they increase their pipeline and revenue, right? So this is a great example of how that skill of design has been used in a different way to create new value there. So we talked a lot about design, but what I really want to talk about is, well, how do we democratize the specialist skill and allow everyone to use it? Whether it's design, whether it's engineering, or anything else, I think there's a future where we continue to break these skills down and everyone uses multiple skills together to create new value. So this is my framework here. It starts with exposure, and then goes to transparency, and then ends with democratization and decentralization. So let me get into the details here first. So for any skill, any specialist skill, to acquire the skill and understand the skill, you first need to understand it through exposure. If you've never done it, if you've never seen it in practice, you're not going to be able to understand it. So in that kind of application of design, if you wanted to teach someone design, you first need to get them exposed to the design process. And the second part is transparency. So when we think about the creation process, we often think about the end result. If designers are creating design, and even if people are engaging with the end design, if they don't see design as it's being built, they don't understand the process of how design is created, and they can't become someone who uses design as well. And the last part is the democratization and decentralization of the skills and the practitioners itself. So this, I think, is the most important part here. So when we talk about the decentralization of the scope, that means getting this narrow, say, siloed skill set out into different areas. When we think about design, we think about design in brand or product. But that would be bringing it out to other different areas, like going back to the example of Salesforce, bringing it out to sales and seeing how that is applied there. And then the second aspect of that is decentralizing the practitioners, of taking the people who are specialists in doing design and allowing others to engage with design and do that as well. And this can be used not just for design, but any other skill. So just to wrap things up, what I think the most effective products are going to be going forward is they're going to be created from people who are not specialists, but people who are hybrids, people who are blurring the lines, people who are using multiple skills together. So going forward, whether you are a designer, a developer, a marketer, sales, finance, etc., you should think about your specialized skill and how you can scale that to others. Thank you. So I think next up we're going to go to some questions. And I will take the first question. So decoupling skills from roles can happen overnight, especially in big orgs. E.g. salary, promotion, hiring. What are the potential pitfalls? Well, I think right now is one of the probably biggest one is that the specialists will likely have pushback and when their skill is democratized. I think it's natural for most people who are specialists to think of their skill set as defining them, right? And I think that democratizing a skill will mean that they no longer need to exist. But I think that specialists will always need to exist. They'll always need to be the specialists in that area to teach everyone and be the custodians of that skill set. So I think it comes from an aspect of how do you build trust in a way that the specialists feel that they can continue to exist and thrive in this area, but then you can also democratize those skills. But when it comes to big organizations, I think, again, going back to the culture aspect of it, I think it's getting those specialists to open up and be transparent and involve other people into their skills and into their space to slowly create a culture where there isn't these kind of gaps or like barriers between things. And we'll go to the next question maybe. Besides design, what other skills can be democratized across the org, decoupled from the role? Well, we're here at Developer Context. I think engineering is an incredibly powerful skill. Just the way of thinking and how we use logical thinking in engineering, and along with that, how we use code. So I think that's one area where many different disciplines can learn from that, and they can probably augment their skills in different areas. I think anything that has a, say, logical process to it should be and can be scaled to different areas. And how can a total design newbie pick up the design skills from the engineering product side of the business? From the engineering product side of the business. I think if you are a design newbie, the best place to start is focusing just on design before democratizing the skill. So even though we're thinking the future is about democratizing skills and having everyone sharing those skills, I think first we need someone to be the custodian of that skill. We need the specialists to kind of understand that skill at a deep level so then they can be the ones to teach others. So if you are a design newbie, rather than going first out into using that skill in different areas, starting from the traditional area of just product design and working in that area until you have a thorough understanding before bridging out into other areas is probably like the best approach. I think we have a minute left, and maybe let's go to the last one. So academia is dead. There's no point in deep, sustained engagement in a specific field of knowledge. Well, I don't think that much. I think that for us, in the current kind of like cultural landscape of things, we celebrate specialization a lot. And we maybe deprecate in some ways generalists. We think specialists are celebrated, and generalists will never be as good as specialists, right? And in some ways, we say that in many different forms. But I think you just need to think about specialists are great, but generalists also have the area, right? So you can think about, for specialists, they're going to use their skill set in a certain area to create innovation at the new frontier. But for generalists, they're going to use multiple skills together to create innovation in the gaps between the different skill sets. And that fusion, I think, is what's going to drive innovation. Yeah, I think we're running out of time there. That is it. Thank you.